Welcome to Heart, where we break the silence, bridge the gaps, and bring real conversations about mental health to the forefront. I'm your host, Lee Yaffe, founder and director of The Long Short Road. Hi, Shana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So excited to have you. I like to ask my guests to start by introducing themselves in their own words.
Sure. So my name is Shana. I am the director of an organization called Magen for Jewish Communities. I am also a wife and mom of three kids. Thank God. I have been working in the field of sexual abuse advocacy and abuse prevention for about 13 years now,
Oh,
which is, I like to say, is really like dog years. Like, really, it's kind of feels like it's like 50 something plus, but not actually. I can tell you a little bit about Magen. Magen is an organization that works in three key areas. The first being our first department is kind of called our safety and healing department. So that's where our focus is. We have a 24-hour crisis hotline, so people can call in when they have questions relating to just any child safety concerns or sexual abuse prevention or situations that are concerning to them that they're not sure what to do and how to act. So there's victims that contact us and also other concerned community members, family members, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of the first step generally. And then along with that in that department, obviously our first priority is safety. So if there's a situation where there is a lack of safety, so that will be our first priority is making sure that the victim is safe. And then we offer referrals for therapy. We work with clinics and mental health centers all over the country. We run a number of different support groups for survivors of abuse and others affected by abuse. And that's kind of the first department. A new project that we have actually also in that is supporting victims through the process of applying for government subsidies. With the background of trauma, that's something that in Israel is a possibility for some victims, and can sometimes that stipend can really make the difference for some survivors of abuse between safety, being able to reach safety and or therapy and or not. So that's obviously very important. Our next department is our advocacy and investigation department, and that's where we support victims through everything relating to law enforcement and their rights, courts, et cetera. So that starts with just, first of all, making sure that they have all the information that they need to be able to make a decision about what steps they want to take and can take. Um, and then actually guiding them and walking physically with them through the process, whether it's going to the police or to social services or to court or finding a lawyer or going to Basin, whatever it is that they choose to do. And then our third department is what we call our community and education department. So that's where we focus on the community and raising awareness, educating, and making sure that information, culturally appropriate information, is out there. We've created guidebooks and coloring books for children that are kind of along the safety theme, as well as we do trainings for all different kinds of professionals and paraprofessionals. We also offer trainings for law enforcement, culturally sensitive, kind of dealing with survivors from the Haredi and Dati communities. And I think that's about it.
wow. I mean, there's about it, but there's so much to unpack there.
A
I
lot.
have so many
Yes.
questions, but I actually want to dial back and ask you, it's funny, like sometimes people ask me, like, how did you get involved in suicide prevention? Because it's not such an easy thing. So, like, how do you end up doing such work? So I have the same question for you. Like, how, walk us through a little bit. How did you end up in this field and what drew you to this line of work?
So it's a really good question, one that the answer is a little bit messy or complicated because it didn't really happen
We like
in
messy and
one.
complicated. Our tagline for the long short road is healing is messy. So welcome.
Yes, absolutely. So it really was a process. I mean, from the time when I was 14 years old, I often share the story. I had an experience. I already knew about sexual abuse. Most of the people that I knew, most of my friends had been sexually abused.
At
And that
4.
was something that, yes, at 14, I knew that. And I remember talking about that with my friends and saying, like, oh, nobody realizes that this is an issue that's going on in the frum community. In my tremendous naivete, just assumed that no one was dealing with it because nobody knew.
Right,
And if they knew, then they would do something.
right.
Um, so that was kind of the first, I said one day I'm gonna get a PhD and I'm gonna do my thesis about this. Thankfully, the world did not wait for me to get around to doing my PhD because it hasn't happened yet. So I'm glad people started talking about abuse and didn't wait for me. But it was something that I knew was like was a really big problem. And I initially I thought I was going to work in this field. I wanted to do this. I There was a particular incident that I always think about where I had a friend that was raped, and we thought she might be pregnant. And in the time that this was going on, we were in a public bathroom in a bus station, and I had this situation where I was with and I had the situation where I was with her and one other friend, and I remember seeing a sticker on the wall from one of the rape crisis centers. That was something that was just becoming a
Mm,
thing in Israel,
mm,
and I remember I said to my friends, "I'm going to do that one day. Like I'm gonna do something like that." I ended up really kind of focusing more on working with the at-risk population, like at-risk teens, just based on my own personal experiences. That was something that was really important to me. And I worked in that field for a couple years. I starting from the time that I was very young. It was like my first jobs were in that space.
mm.
And I just couldn't get away from this issue. I couldn't like, I mean, anyone who works with the population of at-risk teens knows that there is a high prevalence of sexual abuse in the background. And I just kept finding this like it was I couldn't, there was no way to get away from it.
Right.
And then when the organization that I was working for closed, I was pregnant with my youngest daughter, and I started volunteering for an organization that was very new at the time. It was a local community organization in Beit Shemesh, that helped support families that were dealing with situations of child abuse. It was actually more physical abuse than sexual abuse. Um, and but that was where I kind of started specifically the work on in this particular field. And it has evolved into something that is much, much bigger than me.
Wow. Wow. That's, I mean, it's amazing. And also, I think I may have said this to you off camera, like when we were speaking before, that I like it's amazing that Magen exists. And also, it makes me sad that there's a need, like it
Yeah.
makes me sad that there's a need for our organizations in with such like severity.
Yeah. I it every day I have to grapple with that
Yeah.
every day. And every time I really tell anyone I think about what I do, that is often the response that I get is how terrible that, first of all, a lot of people, and I'm jealous of the people that don't realize this is
How
actually
bad it is. Right.
a job that there are people that work full time in. Like they think
Yeah.
this is something I must do on the side as a chesed
Right.
because there can't possibly be enough work to justify this being my entire life.
Right.
Not only is this my entire life, but I have a team of people and it is their entire lives too. And if we were double the size that we actually are, we would all be busy.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
And so can we take that apart for a second? I don't know. Maybe it's just like my own desire to believe that people like see how bad it is, but how is it possible that like people don't in this day and age in 2025 there's still people who don't don't understand the severity that like the amount of sexual abuse victims we have in the Orthodox community, the amount of people who need support, like there is a need for this kind of support and that it does require so much effort, time, energy from so many people like right like you and your team like how I don't know. Maybe that's just my own like I want to believe that people are waking up, but I guess maybe that also proves that there's still work to do if there's people who don't believe that it's so necessary, you know?
There's definitely work to do. I think that you can't compare where we're at on a community level, now versus 10 years ago.
Oh,
So there's definitely been a tremendous amount of progress on many fronts, but specifically the awareness and the understanding that this is a really prevalent issue. It needs to be addressed. I don't feel that we've gotten to the point where it's seen as a mainstream issue.
mhm.
Like it's still something that's sort of like fringe.
Like
We're
people see
all sort
it's
of,
happening on the fringe. It's not something that's
yes,
right.
yes.
Yeah, it's
Um,
with suicide that people are like, this is really an issue in our community. I'm
yeah.
like, and something interesting I think that lines up with both sexual abuse and suicide, which I would love to hear your take on this, is, people often ask me like, well, what are the statistics around suicide in the frum community? Like I could tell you based on lived experience and what I know from the field, I don't have hard data because no one's done that research. So
Right.
I know the numbers are high because I'm
Yes.
getting all the phone calls. I don't have a research study that's been done.
Right. And of course, it also can work sort of against us because I have people who will say to me, well, of course you think sexual abuse is so prevalent because,
Because it's all
you
you
know,
see. Right.
right. And when you're like, when you're a cardiologist, everyone you know has heart
That's
disease
heart attack. Right.
because that's what you do.
Right.
So I realize that. I acknowledge that. Yes, obviously, I know a higher number of victims of sexual abuse than the average person, I would assume, given that all I do all day is talk to victims of sexual abuse. But with that said, I mean, yes, there's not enough research. Forget not enough. There's barely been
No,
any research on
right.
this topic on the topic of sexual abuse in Orthodox Jewish communities and Jewish communities in general. There have been a few studies that have been done. Um, some that focused on the Jewish community as a whole, some that focused on women in Orthodox communities. None that really were able, like, that were comprehensive enough or broad enough to give us a real good
Right. So
picture.
picture.
We do know that in Israel, 1 in 5 children is a victim of sexual abuse before their 18th birthday, and that does include the religious community, meaning that research was done cross communities. That is the national statistic, and it includes the Orthodox Jewish community as well.
Yeah.
I have spoken to many. I recently was having a conversation about this with someone. I was in a seminar, and the psychologist that was talking about this said that if you talk to people that work in this field, if you talk to mental health professionals that treat victims of sexual abuse from the Orthodox Jewish community, he said, I have never found one of them that believes the numbers are lower.
Right.
Like that he could say.
For sure.
Nobody believes it's
Right.
lower.
Right.
Whether or not it's higher, we don't know.
Right.
And we can all speculate. We all have our thoughts about the fact that, in communities that are more insular and are less willing to deal with the problem or report the problem,
Right.
are just by common sense are going to, the problem's going to be more prevalent because it isn't being addressed.
Right.
But we don't have any our data whatsoever to state that clearly. So the answer is we don't know, but we know that the situation is not good.
Right.
That much we know.
Right. And so let's take that back. I want to like broaden this a little bit. And could you kind of paint a picture for me of what you're seeing, with having your boots on the ground in terms of, yeah, I get what is it that you're seeing in I guess, the ages of victims who are coming to you, the kind of support they're looking for. Like, are we talking about like kids like as young as like elementary and middle school? Or are we talking about adults? Like who's being I mean, I think everyone's being impacted. I know that, but I kind of want to hear from you. Like, what are you seeing?
So most of the victims that we're supporting are so it's split between adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Most of the victims that contact us were abused as children. Not all. We also support victims who were abused as adults, usually in situations where there was some kind of power imbalance. So where the perpetrator was a rabbi, a therapist, a doctor, a teacher, somebody in a position of authority where the dynamics, even if the victim wasn't a minor, the dynamics very much mirror the experience of child victims, given that tremendous power imbalance. So we do offer support to quite a number of survivors in those situations as well. But I would say the vast majority are survivors of child sexual abuse.
Yeah.
We do have many adult survivors of sexual abuse that reach it that contact us. However, we have more and more in recent years. We get more and more calls from parents of children that have been abused more recently, and obviously, on the one hand, it makes the support that we offer a little bit more complicated because when you are trying to support a child who is still a child and you're offering that support through the parent, through the caregiver,
Right.
it's a little more complicated. Also, the child's capacity to be able to give a true accounting of what happened on a level that is admissible to the authorities, certainly even to like social services, is very difficult.
Right.
The vast majority of those cases end up being closed if we're talking about legally speaking, because the kids just can't,
Right.
they don't have the capacity to be able to share at the level that they need to be to make it admissible. Um, so it's both. It's very much kind of on both sides.
And as you're saying, you're sharing this, where my mind is going is to the adults who they were abused as children and they're now
Yes.
speaking as adults, and what that must be like, the shame that they're carrying maybe for decades before they come to get support and,
Yes.
and speak up. And something that I was thinking about as I was preparing for our conversation today is, something that I hear a lot in the suicide prevention field, like within the Haredi community, within the Orthodox community, is like, okay, we can acknowledge that it's happening, but we shouldn't talk about it out loud because, like, chas v'chalila, we're shaming our community, and then it's like a chilul Hashem because people are reading in the media about da da da, and it's like, well, hold on a second. If you're worried about chilul Hashem, let's take it. Just hold on a second, right? But I do think that that's something that comes up a lot when I see a lot of um co-occurring instances where people who will reach out to our warm line for support because they're struggling with intense suicidal ideation, and a lot of it is connected to sexual abuse that they've survived and have never, like, sometimes we're the first person, right? Our team is the
Right.
first,
Right.
right? So it's just like, on one hand, it's like, yes, okay, we want to I guess protect the sanctity and the dignity of our community, but also protecting the sanctity and dignity of our community means that we have to speak up about things that are happening. We can't, like, hide it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I 100%. I mean, we hear this, we get this argument a lot um, because we do, one of the tools that we do use and utilize is, is the media and is the secular media.
Right.
And we get a tremendous amount of pushback about that. Why do we need to send it to secular media? Well, if everyone actually was dealing with abuse in the way that they need to be and should be dealing with abuse, then we would never need to go to the media. The media really is a last resort in my mind. Not even because, even if you put aside the Chil Hashem, because it's not a good, it's not great. It's not
Right.
great for the victim. It's not great. Like they often really don't, it's very hard to go through that process. In
Right.
some ways, it's similar to the police, which has its own challenges.
Right.
But it's a very vulnerable position for a survivor of abuse to have to be in, to be
Right.
sharing their story in that way. Um, it's not ideal.
Yeah.
And when we are doing that, it's because we've really tried everything, or the victim has tried everything, and this is what the victim now wants because this is what there is, and we will do whatever we need to do, and that includes the media. So by all means, everyone that is worried about Chil Hashem, clean it up.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, clean it up. Get it together. And then there won't be, I mean, because abuse is happening. Abuse is happening. Abuse has been happening, and we are not special. Abuse is happening everywhere.
Right.
And as soon as we acknowledge that, and as soon as we actually deal with that and deal with it effectively, not, it's become very popular in recent years. The Haredi community loves to send victims to therapy because they figured out, okay, we can't just keep ignoring it, so we're just going to send people to therapy. But therapy has become sort of like, it's just the more elegant way of shutting people up.
Right.
Okay, we
It's a
send you to a
catch-all.
therapist, and now you
Right.
don't have to talk to anyone else because you're talking to your therapist.
Now.
But no, that's obviously that's a huge, that's a huge step. It's important.
Right.
But if you're not willing to also look at safeguarding, look at justice, look at just all the other steps of what's involved here, therapy isn't really going to be an authentic healing experience
Sure.
because the victim doesn't have their options open to them.
Right. And if the environment they're going home to after the 50-minute therapy session is not a safe environment, and they have parents who don't believe them, or who are, I've seen cases where they're supporting the perpetrator. So it's
Yes.
how is 50 minutes of therapy a week going to be help? Like, yes,
No.
it's
If
that,
anything, it's an incredibly elaborate form of gaslighting. Because
yeah,
if you're sending a victim to therapy, but you're forcing them to continue to have a relationship with their abuser, or you're putting them in a situation where they're watching everyone else continue to love and appreciate and respect and whatever, and not hold their abuser accountable for their actions,
right,
then what are you doing?
yeah. No, it really, I don't know, it really boggles my mind. And it also just, I mean, part of me is like, to what extent, what loopholes are we jumping through to protect the wrong people? Like, what is this backwards? I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Shauna. What is this thing that we have about, I've seen it so many times where it feels like our community, like, I'm not speaking about one particular community. I think across the board in Orthodox communities, I have seen communities come together to support and protect perpetrators over victims. Like,
Yes.
what is that?
Yes.
I mean,
So
I don't know
in
if there's
my
an
mind,
answer, but
I'll tell you what I think about that. I mean, sometimes they are protecting the perpetrator. The perpetrator, for whatever reason, is somebody, either he's somebody who's powerful, or he's somebody who has money. He's somebody who the community values for whatever reason, and so they're actually protecting the perpetrator. Often, it is not even about the perpetrator. The perpetrator is no one special. nobody that they have any particular alliance to. The threat here, it's about the community. They don't care. I mean, sometimes we'll have, if victims contact us, they got a phone call from an Askin from the community. The Askin calls them and he said, I really, I care about you and I care about your well-being and I want to come meet with you because I care about you. The Askin doesn't care about you. The
Right.
Askin doesn't even care about the abuser. The Askin cares about the community that
Mm,
he's representing. That is all he cares about.
well,
You are only useful to him and it only productive for him to engage with you. And so long as he thinks it's going to help him protect the community, period,
wow.
end of story. So
But
I think
what
it's sometimes
protect
a
the community?
distraction.
You're not protecting the community, right? Like
You're
it's
protecting the
so
community's
backwards.
reputation. Yes. So when I say protecting the community, I mean protecting the community's status quo. That's always what it's about. It's about maintaining a certain status quo.
Right,
The royal we have built a community that is built on certain key principles. We need people to believe XYZ. We need people to do XYZ. We need people to buy into XYZ.
right,
We need that in order to maintain the power and control that we have over this community. And you, as the victim, are now threatening that. The abuser isn't threatening that. The abuser has already done what he's done, or
right,
she, done what they've done, and they're not so important as far as this leadership is concerned.
right,
What matters is who is now, right now, who is the threat right now, and the threat right now is the victim, as far as they're concerned, meaning from that perspective. So I think again, that's not to say that in some situations they're genuinely protecting the abuser,
right.
and he becomes sort of this like figure of all that is, he has been this injustice that has been done to him. That
All
does happen, but
wow,
overwhelmingly I have found that it's really not about who the abuser is. It's just about maintaining a status quo.
wow. The lengths that we will go to
Yes, cognitive dissonance is a very powerful thing.
I mean, it just
Yes.
it blows my mind because again, I said this before, but I feel like when I came into the field, I think everybody does. You come in with this like naive sense of like, I'm gonna solve everything. I'm gonna fix everything. I'm gonna whatever. And then you like get into the communities and you get out into the world and you have conversations with the people and you start and it's like, wow, we're really swimming against the current in certain ways.
Yes.
This is a very broad question, but I think we could probably start broad and then break it down. Obviously, healing is very unique to every person. For victims of sexual abuse who are listening right now, what are like, for someone who's sitting with this, they've never shared with anyone before, or they've shared and people have disregarded them or told them to just keep quiet. What are like the initial steps that someone could take to start making progress in working with this trauma that they've experienced?
It's a great question. I think, I mean, again, I do want to reiterate what you just said, which is that this is an incredibly individual thing. And there's absolutely no one size fits all for victims of abuse. The only thing that I will say without question is that the first step has to be safety.
Mhm.
There is no healing without safety. If you're in an environment that is unsafe, then you're not going to be able to start an effective, authentic healing process. So that is very important. Now, how do we get to that? How do we get to the healing? How do we get to the safety? Even obviously, those are very big questions.
Right.
I would say that usually it has to start with um, it can't be a secret anymore. Now, when I say that, sometimes people, especially because I'm so public about this issue, people get very scared and feel like I'm saying you need to go public with your
Right. Like
story.
get a bullhorn and
Absolutely
like
not.
shout it from the rooftops.
Yes, absolutely not. You do not owe anyone your story, your experiences whatsoever. When I say it's important to share, it's because is the silence can drown you. The silence really is all the shame and all the feelings of that this was your fault and somehow, or that you could have done something to stop it that you didn't do, or that you have some responsibility now, whatever. All of that exists in the echo of your mind.
Right.
And it's real. It's very real when it's in there. It's important to share that with someone else. Now, of course, I'm going to say therapy. Therapy is important. I do believe that, but therapy can look different for different people. Not everybody, can connects with the same kinds of therapy. I hear people talk about like EMDR is an amazing trauma therapy. It's not for everyone. It's
Really
not
not.
effective for everyone.
Right.
And it's important to say that. because sometimes I've heard from victims who are like, I went to EMDR and it didn't help. Okay, you're one of the people that it's not effective for. It's okay. You're not crazy.
Right.
There's, somatic experiencing, there's there's so many different therapeutic modalities, trauma focused CBT. So it can be helpful, first of all, if you can find a therapist just on your own, great. That could be the first person that you share with.
Right.
But maybe there's someone else in your actual inner circle, in your world, that could be a safe person that you could share this to, even if not all the nitty gritty details, but just in general. That can be a really important first step. And or maybe you can join some sort of forum, some sort of group forum. There are different support groups even online sometimes. Support groups I generally don't recommend as a first step because they also have the potential to be very triggering. So usually I recommend support groups after someone's already been through their own therapeutic process.
Mm.
That the groups that we do, we actually only accept people that have already either are in or have been in therapeutic process
Right.
for that reason.
Right. That makes
But that can be another step if you don't feel like there are really many people in your life, in your real life, that you can share this with. So a support group can be another step. And then, I mean, there are organizations that offer support. So if it's easier for you to call and share with a stranger, at least to start with, you can do that. You can call an organization, you can share, they might be able to guide you. But it's also important to be aware that again, you're unique. So not everything that's going to work for someone else may work for you. Maybe you'll find that the organizations didn't really help. That's okay. You could try another organization. You could try therapy. There's a lot of different, but again, the first step does have to be safety. But after that, it is so individual. Some victims find a tremendous amount of healing in pressing charges. It
Yeah.
can be very empowering. Even something that I encourage victims, because when you press charges, you are in no control of what ultimately happens to the case.
Right.
It's very much out of your hands in a certain respect. You give this to the police, and then it's like, okay, go do your job. And then we hope they do a good job.
Right.
And sometimes they don't.
Right.
But that's, that can be very scary, just sort of giving that like over to someone else. On the other hand, though, if you do it from a place of, this is the next step in my process, and I feel like this is the right thing for me to do. And now I am sort of giving this to another human being, and now it's their responsibility. There can be something very cathartic about that. And I very much encourage victims, and we really try to empower victims to approach pressing charges from that perspective. You're not in control of the ultimate outcome. If you go into this absolutely determined, he must be convicted, he must sit in jail, you might
Right.
come away being very disappointed and devastated and feeling like the system failed you and didn't believe you, when often that is not the case. Even when the system absolutely believes you, there are so many technicalities involved, so many, in
Right.
convicting someone of a crime, especially a serious crime like this. So often, the vast majority of cases in Israel of sex crimes that get reported, the vast majority get closed because of insufficient evidence to bring to trial, not because it wasn't true. There's also such a thing as a case being closed because they believe that it wasn't, that this didn't happen.
Mm.
Um, that's exceedingly rare. It is most often because they just don't have enough evidence to prosecute. So when we have, victims that we've supported that very much are approaching this from that place of, I'm going to do mine, I'm going to do my what's in my hands. This is my ishtadlus. And after that, I'm gonna leave it in their hands. It's their responsibility now. I'm gonna leave it in Hashem's hands. And then that's it. It really can be very positive. And then obviously, if the person gets arrested, if the person gets great,
Right.
the community is that much safer, and someone is held to account, and that's important. But if that doesn't happen, then it's important that this isn't an experience that is just completely devastating and crushing.
Right. Right. Because it is very challenging to not go in with certain expectations, I think, when
Yeah,
you're
of
in that also
course.
because you so badly want justice to be served and to feel heard and seen.
Yeah.
And I have
I,
seen,
I,
right.
Yes. I'll even say on the flip side, I've been in contact with victims who usually, when I was in touch sort of after the process had already kind of worked, they'd already gone through most of the process, and they've shared how there was this expectation, let's say in cases where a case is filed, their abuser is indicted and is brought to trial and then is convicted, where they expect this certain massive sense of closure and peace once it's like, okay, he gets 13 years in jail. And then it's like, there's almost something anticlimactic about it because I'm still here.
Right.
And everything that I suffered through still happened. It
Happened.
doesn't go away.
Right.
So it really is important to temper the expectations of just knowing that like this is the goal.
Right.
This is what we know we'll accomplish. This is what we might accomplish. But regardless of what happens, you deserve healing.
Yes.
You deserve what happens in the courtroom doesn't necessarily align with what you really deserve at
Right.
all. It's just that is the reality. There's a par between reality and like a courtroom. It just that's how it is. That's how the system works.
Right.
So that's really important also to know that even in a situation where the case is as successful as it can possibly be, and he's going to jail for 19 years, and everybody knows, and they know that he will never be able to abuse anyone again, and there
That's
still can
take
be that
away.
feeling of like
Right.
letdown that like, wait, I'm still like, but I'm still in so much pain, and I still went through so much, and this doesn't change that.
Right. Right. And it's interesting because I'm thinking as you're saying, people ask me a lot like, do you really believe that healing is possible even from such intense trauma? I'm like, I do. But part of healing, I just had this conversation with someone yesterday that they were saying to me like everybody keeps telling me to let go, let go. Like I'm like, okay, let go doesn't mean pretend it never happened, close the door on it, don't feel any more pain. It's letting go of a potential for a better past. You can't change
Yes.
what happened, which is devastating. And
Yes.
also there is possibility to move forward into a positive future that is not narrated by the abuse that a person experienced.
Yeah. This
It's hard.
should be one part of who you are. It is. It's never going to go away. It is always going to be something you experienced.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be more than that, meaning it could be something you experience, even something awful and horrible and huge that you experience, but you're also going to experience so many other things.
Right.
And you're going to witness so many other things, and you're going to live through so many other things. And at some point, we hope that this will be just sort of just one thing in the
Right.
list of hopefully mostly better things
Yeah.
that have happened in your life. And it
Yeah.
isn't like a key part of who you are
Yes.
or
Definitely.
the key part of who you are.
I really resonate with that, and I'm so happy that I really appreciate that you framed it that way because I feel like, when a person experiences trauma, it could like not I'm not God forbid trying to diminish or belittle trauma at all because I think that, trauma changes us, but healing changes us also, right? Trauma rewires the brain, but so does healing. And that the trauma can become, on the grand spectrum of life, if you look at all the waves of life, it's like one part of a much longer story of who you are. And one of our taglines at the Long Short Road is this is your story so far. So far. This is the story you've lived so far. It doesn't have This is not the story that you have to live forever, and it's not who you're going to be forever.
One of the most profound experiences that I ever had was I was at an event with my husband. It was a community event, like nothing to do with my work. I happened to be sitting at a table with another couple, and I happened to know that the husband is a survivor of some really horrific sexual abuse as a young adolescent.
Mm,
And he is, as you would never know, he
right.
is an extremely successful person.
Of course.
They have a beautiful family.
Right.
He's an accomplished from man and in many different ways. And I happened to get a phone call while I was sitting there from a mother who's who had just recently found out that her 5-year-old son had been horrifically and sadistically sexually abused by his Hasa driver, the person that drove him to school. And
Right.
she was really at the start of the process. Like she was in the most excruciatingly
Shell shock.
agonizing part of that. Like what does this mean? What is this going to mean for my
Right.
son?
Right.
And it just because of the situation, and I just happened to be sitting across from this man, I said to her, I want to tell you, she said, is my son going to ever be okay? That was her question. Just tell me that my son is going to can be okay one day. And she was doing all the right things. They had found him an excellent psychologist. She was really doing everything that she could possibly do. But nobody could say to her, what's going to happen. I couldn't really say to her what was going to happen either. But what I could say to her is, I happen to be sitting right now across from a man that I know was raped as a young teenager, went through absolutely horrible abuse, and he has built a beautiful life for himself. And that does not take away from the incredibly difficult path that he had to walk to get there. I know that, but he did get there.
Wow.
And if you would ask him right now, this would not be the thing that defined his life at all. He's had other wonderful things that happened in his life. He's also had some other difficult things that happened in his life. But this is not it. It does not end here. And I just felt like being able to say that to her was the greatest comfort. Again, I wasn't saying to her, your son's going to be fine. I can't
Right.
say that. No
It's the
one can make
beginning
her
of
that
the parallel
promise.
process, right?
Yes, yes, but he could be.
Right,
That there is that possibility here. That is what you have to work towards.
right.
And because I don't always get to do this, but this particular woman, I continue to be in touch with every year. Before Rosh Hashanah or Pesach, I would call her just to check in on her son, her and her son. And last year, I remember when I spoke to her, she said to me, "We just a few months ago we celebrated his bar mitzvah, and
Wow.
he's doing very well."
Wow.
And it was very moving to me because he is, again, he's still, she said they're still in touch with the therapist and they're still, but he's on that path
Right,
towards being okay.
right,
And she wasn't sure he would be, and nobody is, because
right,
it is so easy to think, especially like in some ways even more so for the person, not the victim themselves, but for
right,
the person who just is hearing it and knowing it, and especially for a parent who has the added that guilt of, oh my God, how did I not protect my child from this? And how did this happen under my nose? And I didn't know. And for so many months he was telling me he didn't want to go to school and I didn't know why. And I pushed him to go. There
mhm,
are such devastating feelings that a parent is dealing with in a moment like that. But just knowing it can be okay.
yeah,
And you have what to work towards. And that's the goal now. Now you have a goal. Now you know what you're working on.
right. Wow. That made me so emotional. Because like the
I
justification,
will say when I told her that night, I got off the phone and I sat and cried outside the
I'm
event.
gonna
I
say,
remember that.
like,
And I don't usually,
you know,
yes.
I'm like I usually can hold it together when I'm like, when I speak to families and like over, just this year alone, our warm line got over 400 phone calls. And
Oh my God.
sometimes it's like the people I speak to, I really hold it together, but there was it's so interesting. I was at an event a few years ago where it was a group of three families who had lost their children to suicide. And we were all coming together for an awareness event. And it was the first time it was two sisters in a community who had lost their father to suicide, and then two other families who had lost their children. And the two other families had lost their children in the same, both children died by suicide in the same location. So that it was like they were all bonded by this. And I held it together until I got home. I drove from where it was back to my house in Philadelphia. I was still in my shaitel. I was still in my clothes. I still had a full face of makeup on. I laid down on my bedroom floor and I just sobbed for an hour. And so this is a very interesting transition because I wanted to ask you this question is like, how do you not let the stories you hear get to you? People ask me that all the time. This is my answer. I build Lego.
Oh,
I
that's
build
great.
I build Lego in my free time, which is very none, I have no free time. But like, my kids go to bed at 7:30. At 9 o'clock, I sit down, I build for 20 minutes, and then I go to sleep because I need to do something with my hands but like, how do you're hearing the worst of people's pain. You are sitting with them in the most intense traumas. Like, what do you do for yourself, Shauna? Like,
So
do you,
first of all, I just want to say, and this is a warning of what's to come. My children are now no longer at the age where they go to sleep at 7:30,
right,
and it has become. I always say to my husband, like, we traded off like the diapers, like they're responsible now for their own hygiene,
right.
for their own,
But they go to
but
sleep
we
at midnight.
never get a second alone.
Yep, yep, yep,
Because like I'm begging my son to go to sleep so that I can go to sleep because I don't want to leave him up roaming the
yep,
house by himself because
yep,
then God knows what time he'll go to bed. And I'm like,
yep,
I'm so tired, please, I'm begging you.
yep.
So that's gonna go away at some
I
point, please
know.
God.
So
And then
right
you
now
don't even
we're
have
in
your
like
nights.
the diapers and feeding, bottle feeding in the middle of the night stage, but like they still start at
Right.
a normal time. But
Yes.
really, so okay, so actually two questions. One, how do you like care for yourself with the intensity of your job? And two, how do you talk to your kids about your job? And what do they know? And how have like my oldest is 6. So when people ask her, what does your mom do? She says, my mom helps people learn about and help them deal with their big feelings.
It's great.
She knows the word suicide because she's heard me say it. She doesn't know what it means, and I'm not ready to explain that to her at 6. But she knows, like, this morning when I was getting ready, she's like, Ma, are you going to help people with their big feelings today? I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So, like, how do you, you know,
Yeah.
It's such
I
a
love that. I don't, how do I deal with this? So my answer today is, um, first of all, my team. I don't work alone anymore. And when I look back at the time that I did, because there was a good chunk of time where I was very much just like a one woman show,
yeah,
working with various, here or there, but having a team has changed my life.
yeah.
Um, I think they are the reason I am sane
Mm-hmm.
today, along with I have a very supportive husband. Like he has very much made this his life's, he has very much made supporting me his life's work
Mm,
to let me do this.
yeah.
I don't really have any other way to explain it. He also is a busy person in his own right, but like in terms of his like calling, I know that he very much sees this as a huge priority in his life, and it has been
Mm,
tremendous for me because I couldn't do this without just complete emotional, like when I come home at the end of the day on days when I am just done, like I can't talk, I can't make eye contact, I can't, he is very understanding. So that's and then on the practical things also, like when it's like I will not eat, so he will literally make food and put it down in front of me and say eat now
Our
so that
husbands
you
should talk, Shauna, because it's
yes
the same thing
yes
here. Like it really like just yesterday I had it's so interesting because there's some times where especially now like with our warm line, I mean as you were saying that like you were a one woman show for a long time. I just brought on volunteers for the first time after 6 years of running the warm line by myself. Those
that's
400 calls this year, I took by the 400 calls that I got between January and September, I took by myself. All the calls that have come in since have been split up among the volunteers. And I said to one of them got off a call the other day and immediately texted me. She was like, first of all, that was unbelievable. I'm so happy I was able to talk to that person. Second of all, how did you do this by yourself for so long? Because I'm tired after a 20-minute phone call. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's it's
yeah
brutal. But the
yeah.
importance of having, right? No person I think is an island. Anyone who's running an organization, like if you have to have support. Because how, I mean,
Yeah,
you're,
and the stories that you hear are
yeah,
the stories that I hear are mind bending. Like
yeah,
you just you want to do anything. I remember once being in a police station with a victim, and it was the first time, and I remember discussing this with my team, like that feeling. I had an urge at one point, and I know this is I will explain what I mean by this. I had this urge to jump out the window when she was
yeah.
talking at one point,
Oh,
not because I wanted to hurt myself, God
right,
forbid, that wasn't even it.
right.
To get out of there. Like there was this, and it like an instinct. I can't really explain it because I wasn't going to actually do it.
Of
Also,
course.
there's bars on the windows in Israel, so I couldn't if I wanted to. But like that was the urge. The urge was I was so desperate to get out of this, hearing what I was hearing, that I
Yeah,
had this like sort of this like instinct to jump out the window,
get me out of here.
and it was and I just remember being like fascinated by that by myself
Yeah.
because I had heard in some ways I'd heard worse. Like
Hmm.
I've heard a lot of, but for whatever reason, in that moment, it was unbearable. And yeah, you need people to process that with. You
Yeah.
really, really do.
Yeah.
So definitely my team is just, like talking to my team and hanging out. I mean, there's other things I try to run a couple times a week. I don't always manage, but I do like to go running, or going to the gym. I will hang out with my kids. We'll, do puzzles or something like that together. Like I really enjoy doing that. Um, Getting together with family. I would like to say friends, but unfortunately, I'm not a very good friend. I don't spend very much time with friends. I should. And yeah, I think those are in terms of like my just to maintain my sanity.
Yeah.
But I think that there's as far as my children, it's really tough because I've been doing this for a long time.
Hmm.
My kids were really little when I started, and I think that first of all, the personalities, all three of my kids' personalities are very, I think because I raised them with such an openness where I would answer literally any question they had, they couldn't care less. Like it's very ironic. I was a very curious kid. I wanted to know everything. My oldest, no, both my kids are pretty curious, but like when it comes to my work and this type of stuff that I'm dealing with, somehow at a very young age, they just decided we really don't want to know. Whatever it is you're doing, it really doesn't sound pleasant. We don't want to know. So even when I've tried sometimes to explain things to them, they're like, no,
Right.
please stop. No, I don't want to know. Like, I don't want to know any more than I have to. They've picked up on a lot. And over the years, I mean, I think when they were younger, I remember my daughter used to think that I helped people get therapy. I helped people whose parents didn't treat them well get therapy.
Wow.
That was kind of what they had picked up on. There was a lot of cases of incest. And so that was, I remember the first time I brought we went to family therapy with my daughter. She was dealing with some school anxiety. It was nothing, thank God, related to this field. But when I told her we were going to go to therapy, she said, therapy is for people whose parents don't treat them well, and you treat me very well. Like, she didn't understand what we were going to be doing and why would she go to therapy. So I explained to her there's different kinds of therapy, and this kind of therapy is just for anxiety your anxiety gets too big.
Yeah.
But it's very different than the kind of therapy than trauma therapy, which is for people that have gone through very. So she understood that, but she was really like, I don't know what possible reason could we have to do this? Um, they from the time that they were very young, I think I kind of explained to them that we talked a lot about things like privacy. There's a story that I often share. When my second son was about a year old, I was in the bathroom and he barged in, as 1-year-olds do, and or like 1.5. And I said, I answered his questions and I said, guys, can you give mommy her privacy? And he said, okay. And he closed the door. And then a second later, he opened the door again and he stuck his head in and he said, where's your privacy? Like, as if I said, can you give me my privacy? And like, he's going to go get me my
Yeah.
privacy and give it to me. And I'm like, well, I don't know, but it's definitely not in here with you. Because like, he didn't really know what privacy meant. He just knew it was a thing that mommy asks for sometimes. So there's a lot of like, the words and the concepts are things that I talked about with them from a very young age without getting into what is sex, what is
Why?
sexual
Right.
abuse, what is, exactly. They understood that it can be very traumatic for children when people touch them inappropriately.
Yeah.
They could not understand why someone would do that.
Right.
And a few times my sons asked me over the years, I remember them asking me, maybe probably the first time when they were like 7, 8, why would someone touch a child inappropriately? Like, what possible? And I said, honestly, it's very confusing and it's hard for me to explain because I don't really understand it either, but it is something that happens. And
Right.
unfortunately, there are some adults that look like safe adults, but are not safe adults. And they do touch children in ways that are either hurtful or are inappropriate and uncomfortable and not okay, or I should say, or uncomfortable or okay, because sexual abuse is not always uncomfortable in the moment. Children don't always
And
experience
that's
it that
part of
way.
what's confusing for them also
Yes,
is if it,
yes,
right? Because
yes,
biologically, you're hardwired for a certain
yes,
way, right? We're all
absolutely.
hardwired to
Yes,
pleasure. So it's
yes.
very confusing,
Very
right?
confusing. And it is one of the things that survivors of abuse experience the most shame around is the fact that they experienced any kind of physical pleasure during the abuse because
Right.
their body responded to
Right.
physical sensation and physical touch, which child sexual abuse is usually not violent.
Right.
And so it usually doesn't get associated with physical pain.
Right.
It's confusing.
Right.
And at a certain point, children often realize something about this isn't right, but they
Right.
don't have the language or even the concepts to understand why it isn't right.
Right.
And it doesn't fit into any of the usual schemas of what we put. Children know
Right.
a hug from their grandmother, good.
Right.
Getting punched by their friend,
That.
bad.
Right.
This thing, this confusing thing that is doesn't fall into any clear category is very hard to conceptualize. So yeah, so I left a lot of room for that confusion for my kids. I left it as this very kind of abstract thing that when they get older, I will continue to explain to them. And I think because I always so much encourage the fact and the idea that yes, some of this is confusing, some of it you don't really understand yet, and that's okay. And as you get older, you'll understand more, and we'll talk more. At a certain point, they very much stopped asking.
Mm.
And when they did ask, I remember one time my son asked me something, and I start launching into an explanation, and I got about 3 words in, and he went, "Never mind, I don't care." I don't know why. I have no idea. My husband just started laughing. He was like, "You regretted that, didn't you?" He was like, "The second the words were out of my mouth, I
I
was like, why did I ask? I
Yeah.
don't want to know."
It, it's so children humble us and such.
Yes,
It's so,
yes,
my oldest. I'm even seeing this with my middle daughter who's 2, is that we use a lot of language around, emotions and feeling feelings. And I'm a big fan of Dan Siegel. Anyone who's listened to the show before knows I call myself the unofficial president of his fan club because I really am. It's like a little ridiculous.
yeah, yeah.
but his work saved my life. So I guess I get to call myself the president of his unofficial fan club. But he has this concept about flipping your lid and explaining to children what happens inside their bodies and their brains when they're feeling big feelings that feel overwhelming for them. And so I taught my daughter, like there's a hand gesture and it's in the book and it's a comic. So we sat down, we read it together. Every time I start to lose it a little bit with my kids, my 5-year-old will say to me, Mommy, you're flipping your lid. I'm like, I can't get away with it. I just can't get away with it.
Yes.
I do have one. I have two more questions I want to ask you. One is about how we can help protect children. One of the things that I have that has been dumbfounded, like I've been dumbfounded by it, and I think maybe it's also because of my own upbringing and because, I grew up in a secular slash Orthodox Israeli home, like we became Balchuva when I was growing up, but my parents were very open with us always about safety and about our body parts and about knowing the names of our, and I find it really is upsetting to me that like very often in the Orthodox community, people are like, we don't say the word penis, we don't say the word vagina, we don't talk about what that like. It's a dirty word. Like we don't educate children about their anatomy. So how are they supposed to know what they're protecting if they don't know what like? So how do we empower, or I guess how could you encourage parents to feel empowered to have conversations with their kids that are both anatomically correct, but also like appropriate for their ages and also the community they're in? So that's the first question.
So I think in terms of there's the anatomy question, and then there's just in general talking about these topics. I think that I want to start with the fact that I think it's tremendous. There's this kind of myth or lack of understanding that people have where they think that talking about personal safety and sexual abuse prevention means explaining to young children the actual like mechanics of sex. And
Right,
it does not. It
right,
does not mean that.
right.
Children definitely have to be taught everything. Children should be taught everything at age, kind of at age appropriate ways and in stages. And personal safety is about, I mean, I do believe that the ABCs of personal safety actually are very much aligned with the ABCs of what ultimately healthy sexuality is, an
Sure.
understanding of my body, your body, the boundaries between us. What am I okay with in my body?
Right.
What am I not okay with? What is my friend okay with? How can I respect my friends, personal boundaries and those things, if you actually think about it from that perspective, are 100% consistent with Torah values and a Torah lifestyle.
Of course.
It's just a matter of framing them in that way. So if we stop talking about tznius as being about like, is your skirt 2 inches below your knee and is your elbows, like if we stopped talking about tznius in such rigid terms where like with rulers and inches and we start talking about it in terms of values and in terms of personal comfort we could change the whole conversation. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet.
Totally.
Yet at all.
Totally.
I shouldn't say at all. Every so often I will come across schools or educators that really are making a lot of progress and efforts to do that, to kind of adjust that narrative.
Right.
Um, and the way that we're learning those things and the way we're expressing them. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So that's first of all is just the first thing is just clarifying this just tremendous misconception that we need to tell children things that are not appropriate for their age. No,
Totally.
absolutely not. We need to teach what we need to teach kids, and then there's a process, and that just leads me to the second point, which is that these need to be ongoing conversations.
Totally.
Never try to have a one-time conversation. If you try to have a one-time conversation with your kid, like this whole the talk,
Right.
you're gonna freak them out
Totally.
because this is too
Right.
much
Right.
to
Developmentally,
and
they can't handle that much influx of information that's new and unfamiliar to them about something so serious. And then it's like, okay, case
yeah,
closed, we're done.
right. You're done now. Now you know.
Right.
Um, there's like a lot of there's so many things. There's just so many bits and pieces, and there are so many opportunities. If you start seeing the world in terms of the opportunities that we have to teach our children about our boundaries and about our other people's boundaries and about um yeah, there's just so many, the
Right.
parsha and world of like just general world events, and so many times that there are opportunities to look at something and say to our kids like, oh, this is something, this is an example of something that's, whatever, or maybe from this we could have learned, or ooh, maybe it would have been better to handle this way, and just use those things, because when you use those things, it becomes part of your general environment and your general family culture, if you will, as
Right.
opposed to just being this like one-time conversation, which is very scary and honestly will probably freak everyone involved a little bit out.
Right.
It's so that's I think a very important part of it. And when I have conversations with parents who have never had a conversation with their child before about personal safety, and now they've got a 14-year-old daughter, the
Right.
reality is the first time you bring it up, it might feel a little awkward
Totally.
because you're starting when she's 14. That's
Right.
that's just the reality.
Right.
But it is what it is. That doesn't mean it's not too late. That doesn't mean you should just say, I once had a mother say to me, okay, so I'll start with my younger kids. No,
I
no.
no.
Please don't just say, okay, forget the older kids. They're on their own.
Right. No, no,
Oh
no.
well. Like,
No.
please talk to them. And you know what? If that first conversation is a little uncomfortable, push through the
Be
discomfort.
there.
It's okay. It's worth it.
Exactly.
Like, your
Exactly.
daughter is worth it. So yes, that's gonna be, as it becomes something that's more natural, and something that you're more, but you'd be surprised sometimes at how I once had a long conversation with a parent about this topic. And at the end he said, yeah, I've never talked to my kids about this, and I've never, and he said he's gonna go talk to his kids. I got a phone call from him 2 hours later. He was utterly beside himself. He
Wow.
had the first kid that he had bumped into after we got off the phone was his 14-year-old. He
Oh,
sat down and started talking to his 14-year-old. His 14-year-old immediately disclosed that he'd been sexually abused by his neighbor for the last 2 years, just on the spot.
oh my gosh.
And and he was crying when he called me, and he was like, he said, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my son's life.
Wow.
And I said, you saved your son's life. I mean, like
Right.
you did this. You opened this
Right.
up. And I will add to that the fact that his son was felt comfortable with that, immediately to disclose means that you had created a certain safety already with him. Even if you had never talked about this directly, there was a certain comfort that he had with you, because there are many children that do hear about this and don't disclose because they
Right.
don't feel safe doing so.
Right.
So that is absolutely that is also true, but it's so important. As far as the talking about genitals, listen, it's challenging, because in communities where I always tell parents that I think that we need to look at this as we need to look at these as body parts. They're body parts just like the rest of our body parts, even covered body parts. In communities that are very, very strict about covering elbows, they still use the word elbow.
Right. Right.
So, and you don't have like a shame associated with your elbow. It's just private.
Right.
So, yes, teach your children that these are private body parts. I used to tell my kids, when my kids went through the phase where they were saying, where they were using body,
On.
talking about body parts or whatever, I used to put them, it was sort of like a timeout, but basically I would send them to the bathroom. That was where I used to tell my kids, because I said it's like not a punishment, because I don't want to shame them about something which is just a part of their body. But the
Right.
fact is, these are body parts that are associated with using the bathroom. If you're using those words, I'm going to assume you need the bathroom, and I'm going to send you to the bathroom. And when you're done using those words, you can come out of the bathroom. It's fine. And that was how I handled it. But obviously, every family is going to do their own thing. The most important thing is your children need to have real words that they can associate with their body parts. If there are different words that are more appropriate in different communities, I know there are different opinions on this. For example, have sometimes told, parents will tell me they really like, no one in their community uses the word penis. They can't bring themselves to it, but they will call their child's penis their bris milah. Now, bris milah is a real word.
Right.
It's not like a made up pastry or something that you're just assigning to genitals.
Right.
It's a real word, and it's clear
It's
to
not
everyone what it's referring to.
calling it what I've heard people call it, which is your front tushy.
No front tushy.
But
None of
that's
that.
why I brought Shauna. That's why I asked
Right.
the question, because like I've had situations where it's like, right, we don't tell our children what their body parts are called. It's the front tushy and the back tushy. And I'm like, you are setting them up in a way that is not healthy. Okay, take away that what you said before this, in Israel, the statistic is 1 in 5. I think in the States we're on par. Like, I think that's statistically accurate in the States also. And I know we can get it, we're not going to get into the
Yeah.
statistics, don't always tell the whole story. Just being comfortable in your body. Eventually,
Yeah.
these children are going to get married and are going to be expected to be sexually active with their partner. That's
Yes.
how are they going to know what to like, you know, something
Then they're
that
gonna have to have. Then they're gonna be having babies,
they're,
likely.
they're going to have
They're
babies
quickly. And they're
quickly.
gonna have to talk to a gynecologist and
They're going to
have a
have,
baby and
I
have
mean,
never known
forget
the
that. They're
term.
going to have to
Yeah.
make a Dika. I
Yes.
remember being in college classes with a girl who when we were handed Badika cloths for the first time says, I don't know, where does this go? Like, you're 20, but that also then becomes the, the thing that I go to where I start to think about, because again, I think this is something I hear so often is we don't necessarily think about sexual abuse happening in like in marital relationships, right? But like marital rape is a thing.
Yes.
Consent is a thing in
Yes.
relationships across the board.
Yes.
That that
Yes.
right? So you're setting by having that vocabulary and having those conversations, you're setting them up for success long term. You're not saying it because you're assuming that your child, God forbid, is going to be abused. You're setting them up for success in life regardless.
Yeah. And when we hear stories of young couples that get married and then they find out that they have not even consummated their marriage, they haven't had sexual intercourse because they didn't even know where anything went.
Right.
Those stories are really, I mean, I think they're kind of funny because they're so ridiculous. They're also devastating.
Yeah.
Like there are real people that really experience these things, and a lot of that has to do with just the utter lack of knowledge about their bodies. The fact that girls are getting their periods and they don't understand what's happening to them, that is
Right.
a big problem. That is traumatic
Yep.
to not know what and why and what the function is of someone's own body.
Right.
We need
For
to
the,
be able
but
to
it's
know what
for
our
the,
own bodies are.
it's for the sake of tznius. That's what bothers me. It's like Hashem created our bodies this way. So, like,
Yes.
what, if we believe that Hashem did everything with wisdom, which we do, then like, how come we're leaving this part out?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not saying that we need to start saying these words in every environment and whatever. You can
Right.
absolutely teach children. These are private words. This isn't something that we should discuss with everyone.
Right.
You discuss this with your parents. I told my kids from the time when they were about 10, when we first started having more direct conversations about what like sexual behavior is. I made very clear to them this is a very private topic, and whatever questions you have, you can always ask me, but this is not something to discuss with your friends. Your
Right.
friends deserve to learn about this from their parents. Please God, they
Exactly.
all are.
Right.
They don't need to hear about it from you. Now, the fact is, because of what I do, my kids are frequently the recipients of questions that their friends have. And my son, it's very sweet. My son has often come home and he said, my friend started asking me XYZ, and I told him he really should discuss this with his father.
Right.
And he said that he's not comfortable, and I said, you should do it anyway. It's very important. So
I
I really like
I
push this because,
feel like you
yeah,
just gave me a crystal ball looking into the future. What's going to happen when my kids are in
yes,
school? They're going to come home and be like, "Mom, it is interesting over the years. Like I have a sister who's in high school, and there have been times where she'll be like, Lee, someone just disclosed something to me. Like I didn't know, like I know I can come to you, but like when are we supposed to do this?" I'm like, okay, right, we have to go to the parents. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward.
yeah.
They might be
Yeah.
upset. There might be, they might feel shame, but better to have an awkward, uncomfortable conversation than to, God forbid, risk someone's life because it's uncomfortable.
There's a quote. There was a very amazing survivor of sexual abuse who died years ago. He was serving in the army during in it was in 20 I don't remember if it was 2014 or 2016 that he I think it was 2016 that he passed away. His name was Dave Gordon. And there was a quote, he wrote an article once for the Huffington Post, like an op-ed about his experience as a survivor of sexual abuse. And one of the things he wrote, which it has stayed with me, and I know with so many other advocates because it's so profound, is blush for a few moments so that others don't have to bleed.
Oh,
And it is a very, very appropriate yes, because
I'm
that's
gonna start using
really
that.
yeah. And that's really like what you said before. How do we create safer communities for our children? That's the answer. Be willing to have uncomfortable conversations,
Yep.
be willing to call out inappropriate behavior or things that even don't wait. It doesn't have to get to the point of sexual abuse.
Right.
There are red flags beforehand, not always, but often there are things that people pick up on and they ignore it because it's uncomfortable, because it's really uncomfortable to call
Yeah.
out something, especially when this is a good person and you know him so well and you know his family and you know da, 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 and there's so many reasons, and who wants to be that person? Doesn't matter. Do it anyway. It's
Oh,
worth the risk. And you know what?
yeah.
Worst comes to worst, you're wrong.
Right.
Worst comes to worst, there was nothing and it was a false
Better
alarm and you got yeah.
better to be wrong than to sit with it
Yes.
years and
Yes.
years and
No
years.
one's going to get thrown in jail because
Right.
you had a slightly off instinct. That's not like everyone needs to keep it in proportion. Have a
Years
conversation.
years
That's
ago,
all.
someone called the warm line and disclosed to me that they had been abused. And I asked them if they, at that point, they were like, I want to tell you who it was. And they told me. And my initial instinct in my head was, there's no way this is possible. There's no, and then my second follow-up was, but of course it's possible, because being frum doesn't exempt us from being human. And unfortunately, we have a lot of unsafe, unhealthy people in our community. And just because they're wearing a black hat and daven at the Amud doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
very, but we have to have those hard conversations. We have to.
Yeah.
What was the quote again, Shauna? Blush for a few moments so that others don't bleed.
Don't have to bleed. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I'm teaching a suicide prevention class later today. I'm putting that into this PowerPoint. Thank you.
Great.
Um, do you have a message of hope for any survivors who are listening right now?
Absolutely. You are not alone. That's number one. You really are not. There is an army of people out there who would stand behind you in a second if you want them to, if and when you want them to. Um, there is healing available, and there is hope.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And wow, you should just like be Zocha to continue doing, to like really see the like revealed positive fruits of all the things you're doing.
Man,
Really, really see the healing take root and take hold and become the reality for the victims that you're supporting.
amen. Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to
Thank
you
you. It was
for
so,
everything you're doing.
thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for tuning in to Heart to Heart. If you or someone you love is struggling, please know there is hope and help is within reach. Since 2019, the Long Short Road has been walking alongside at-risk individuals, offering trauma-informed programs, a non-emergency hotline, and a community that fosters healing. No one has to go through this alone, and we are here for you. Discover how the Long Short Road is changing lives. Visit www.thelongshortroad.com or email us at info@thelongshortroad.com to learn more. You can be part of this mission. Sponsorship opportunities for Heart to Heart are available. Honor a loved one, support your community, and help us make mental wellness resources accessible to those who need them most. Until next time, remember, love and connection are the greatest healers. This is Lee Yaffe reminding you, hope is here, healing is possible, and you are never alone. Together, we're walking this long, short road to a brighter future.